Hello and welcome to Maximum Pantera, the first talking book about the band. It was written and researched by Scott Gigney, music is by Amanda Thompson, and it's read by Sean Jones. You can check out our full catalogue on our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk, where you can also join our Maximum Collectors Club to receive special offers and free CDs. Alternatively, join the Maximum Collectors Club by filling in the registration form attached to the booklet inside this CD and post it back to us.
You know, we were just like a unique chemistry and mixture of the people that stuck out in the best local bands.
1983 was a crazy time in the world of heavy metal. The previous year, Iron Maiden had released their landmark album, Number of the Beast, and they were now preparing to release a fourth album, Peace of Mind. The newly formed Metallica were leading the fledgling thrash scene, along with the likes of Slayer, Exodus and Testament, while a band from New York by the name of Anthrax were flying the flag for the East Coast and were equally important as their Bay Area counterparts. It was also the year that Vincent Abbott, his brother Daryl and father Jerry started a record label by the name of Metal Magic Records. The Abbott brothers were fanatical about metal and started the label with the intention of releasing the kind of music that they wanted to hear. However, it wasn't long before Vincent and Daryl themselves formed a band with their longtime friend Rex Brown. Vincent played drums, Daryl was on guitar, and Rex took on bass playing duties. All they needed to find was a vocalist. Before too long, they recruited a singer by the name of Terry Glaze, and Pantera were born. The band played locally in all the pubs and clubs in their native Texas, and their first ever show was at a venue in Fort Worth called Savvy's. As a result of their punishing touring schedule, it wasn't long before they'd garnered a cult reputation. The band entered the studio to record their debut album, Metal Magic, which was released towards the end of 1983 on their own label. It was a record heavily influenced by Kiss, Deep Purple and Aerosmith. Their local fan base picked up on the album, and it did very well considering that the band were still virtually unheard of outside the Lone Star State. The guys toured promoting the album around the southern states, all the while writing fresh material on the road. The strength of Metal Magic ensured that the band were given prestigious support slots, opening for bands like Stryper, Quiet Riot and Dokken. When the touring ended and the band returned home, they re-entered the studio almost immediately, and in early 1984, the band's sophomore album, Projects in the Jungle, was released. As before, the band quickly took to the road in an attempt to capitalise on their early success. Unfortunately for Pantera, the record bombed. It was mediocre at best, especially to the fans who had so rapturously received the new Iron Maiden and Metallica records. Pantera just weren't doing anything that original. Unperturbed, they went out on tour again. The fans did show up, though it was obvious that the majority of them wanted to hear the material from the first album. A crestfallen Pantera returned home, depressed by the public apathy towards their new release. However, after a heart-to-heart with their father, Jerry, Vincent and Daryl, who had rechristened themselves as Vinnie Paul and Diamond Daryl, decided to go back into the studio and try again. The result of their exertions was the band's third album, I Am the Night, upon which Terry Glaze became Terence Lee. This latest offering was something of a return to form, shifting a fair few copies upon its release, though it didn't scale the heights of Metal Magic. They hit the road again, pulling in the same kind of numbers as they had with their debut record. The tour was a deeply encouraging experience for the band, but it was becoming apparent that something was rotten in the state of Denmark. Vinnie, Daryl and Rex were less than pleased with the lack of input Terence Lee was giving to the band. He had seemed apathetic during the tour, and any of the enthusiasm he once had all but disappeared. Vinnie, Daryl and Rex decided they couldn't work with anyone who wasn't as committed to the Pantera cause as they were. Terence Lee was history. And so the search was on for a suitable replacement for the departed vocalist. Vinnie, Daryl and Rex looked high and low with little luck. They placed adverts in local rock publications, left notices at all the local clubs, and set up numerous auditions, but no one made the grade. As they were becoming ever more frustrated by their predicament, a friend of Vinnie's informed them of an angry young vocalist he knew who hailed from New Orleans. Vinnie was intrigued by what his friend had said, and before long they met up at a Louisiana club. Philip Anselmo was impressed by Pantera. The feeling was reciprocated by the band when they saw him perform with his own outfit. They knew they had their man.
I was trying to mix all this different kind of music, and it wasn't happening, so I just went around and saw everyone I thought was good in these other bands and went for Sam first. And Sam quit his band and went with me, and we got his cousin John. And then while I was gone out of town, they got Wes, so I mentioned Wes, and it went like that, you know.
Philip Hanson Anselmo was born of French-Italian descent on the 30th of June 1968 in the city of New Orleans, Louisiana. Philip's childhood was a difficult one. He hardly knew his father, and his stepfather was a thoroughly unpleasant character. The young Philip rebelled, and by the age of 7 he had already smoked grass and experimented with alcohol. He spent as little time at home as was possible, and as he grew older he would spend the summers working on some of the many shrimp boats that dotted the New Orleans coast. It was hard work, but Philip enjoyed the freedom the money brought him. Before long, as so many kids do, the young Anselmo discovered rock music, and he had a new way to rebel. All the money Philip earned was spent on records by the likes of Black Sabbath, Kiss, Judas Priest, Venom, and many others. His heroes were Ozzy Osbourne, Rob Halford, and Bruce Dickinson. Philip now knew that all he wanted to do was play heavy metal. His work ethic ensured that he practiced his guitar and his singing with an almost religious fervour. His desire to escape into a new life was all the encouragement he ever needed. Philip formed numerous bands after he had finished high school, though none of them had much success, until he was spotted by his future bandmates and invited to join Pantera. The Abbott brothers' progression through childhood and into music was about as different from Philip's as it possibly could be. Vincent Paul Abbott was born on the 11th of March in 1964, near Dallas, Texas. 2 years later, on the 20th of August 1966, Vincent's little brother, Darrell Lance Abbott, was born. The brothers had a great upbringing and were raised in a very stable and loving family environment. As is so often the case with siblings, Vinnie was regularly forced to step in and protect his little brother from trouble, as Darrell had a proclivity to mouth off to kids who were older and tougher than he was. Their father, Jerry, was an accomplished musician who encouraged his boys to play music. Vincent was desperate to play drums, but Jerry wouldn't let him. Instead, he made Vincent play the tuba. This really irked the young Vinnie. How was he going to impress girls with a tuba? But he persevered and stuck at it, until he could convince Jerry to let him have a drum kit, that is. Darrell always knew that he wanted to play guitar. While his brother worshipped Dave Holland from Judas Priest, Black Sabbath's Bill Ward, and Peter Criss from Kiss, Darrell was dreaming of ripping out riffs like Ace Frehley, Tony Iommi, Glenn Tipton, or KK Downing. By the age of 16, Darrell was so talented and capable on his guitar that he was forbidden from entering the school talent show for fear of upstaging all of the other kids. The fact that Darrell had long hair and listened to metal also contributed to this discrimination. His hometown was redneck territory after all. The brothers' love of rock was never based on rebellion. They were in it purely for the music, as was Vincent's friend Rex Brown. Rex was born on the 27th of July 1964. He had a happy childhood and enjoyed life in his small Texan hometown. Rex was a good student and a keen sportsman, but all this went to pot when the young Rex was given his first Kiss record. He immediately fell in love with heavy rock music, and his appetite for it became insatiable. Rex decided to play guitar, but before long he switched to bass. This change was due to his three biggest musical heroes: Gene Simmons of Kiss, Geezer Butler of Black Sabbath, and Ian Hill of Judas Priest. Rex learnt fast, and it wasn't long before he was inducted into Pantera by Vincent. Rex was a founder member of the band. But it wasn't until Philip Anselmo joined the group that Rex felt everything was coming together properly. The final piece of the puzzle was in place. With Philip on board, the band was completely revitalised, and they charged straight into the studio to record their fourth album, Power Metal. It did fairly well. The fan reaction to Anselmo was very positive, and the chemistry of the new lineup in a live situation was fantastic. While on the road, the band started writing songs that went off in a different direction to their previous material. They were excited at the prospect of being able to get home to record new songs. But before they had a chance, a big surprise came their way when an executive from Atco Records came to one of their gigs. He was so impressed that he offered the band a contract there and then. They agreed readily, and Pantera were on the way up.
Before we were anybody, we did a house band tour and a Deftones tour. You know, because Deftones had heard our demo and they wanted to tour with us, so Jacksonville finally was like, wow, you know, maybe these guys are going to do something. And because we had like a good live show and we were like doing something nobody was doing.
The impact on the band of signing to Atco cannot be underestimated. Atco were a subsidiary of East West Atlantic, a big label with money behind them. This meant that when the band entered the studio for the first time, they were not under any pressure to get in and get out as quickly as possible. They were afforded the luxury of time and were told to hire whoever they wanted to produce the album. After a lot of thought, the band settled on an up-and-coming metal producer called Terry Date. With all the pieces set in place, Pantera went into the studio to record their major label debut. It took a little time for the guys and their producer to find their feet. The band were a little guarded about their new material. Was it any good? They weren't keen on exposing their new musical direction to an outsider. But before long, the barriers started to break down. This was due largely to late-night drinking sessions and numerous trips to the strip joints that were local to the studio. As Date and the band bonded, Pantera gradually began to accept him into their inner sanctum, their clique. When they began playing their songs to Terry, he was totally shocked. When he'd been hired to record the album, he'd gone back and listened to the band's previous output, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was hearing now. The sound was stripped down to clearly defined elements. Rex's ominous deep bass sound, Vinnie's tribal drumming, Philip's primal scream, and last, but certainly by no means least, Daryl's outstanding guitar. The more glam rock tendencies that the band had exhibited on the previous records had all but curled up and died. The only clue to their existence being Philip's occasional foray into the ear-splitting territory with his high notes. All the influence of Kiss and Aerosmith had disappeared, only to be replaced by the primitive crunch of Metallica and the frenetic solos championed by the likes of Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman, of the Masters of Thrash Slayer. Date encouraged the band to carry on writing in the new, heavier vein they had discovered. This galvanised the group. It was all the endorsement they could have been looking for, and they wasted no time in ploughing on and writing as much as they could. Eventually, gorged on their own indulgence, they finished writing. It was more than apparent to Terry Date that the songs they had penned were truly something special. The first track on the album sets the tone for what is to come, a little ditty by the names of Cowboys from Hell. The tune became the record's title track, and little did they know it at the time, but it was also to become the band's official alternative name. The song's lyrics told a tale of a demonic posse of cowboys who had taken their leave from hell and were ready and willing to cause some mischief up on earth. Of course, the whole song is an allegory for what the group themselves intended to achieve at the time. They had risen from the obscurity of the heavy metal wasteland, and now they had every intention to get a piece of the metal pie for themselves. The song turned out to be prophetic, to say the least. The album was replete with many fine songs, some of which were destined to become metal anthems. Along with Cowboys from Hell was a deeply affecting track entitled Cemetery Gates. The song describes the heartbreak of a young man who has lost the love of his life and tells of his attempts to regain some semblance of normality. It is possibly the most accomplished song on the record, despite its overall ambience falling into cod operatic territory, thanks to Philip's heartfelt lament. although even this cannot scupper what is, in all honesty, a very beautiful song. And considering the brutality of the tracks that it nestles between on the album, that's saying something. When the band handed in the finished album to the executives at Atco, the response they received was very heartening. There was, however, a big problem. Pantera were just a metal band, and they weren't even that popular. This meant that the Cowboys from Hell album limped off the blocks with next to no publicity or promotion. This didn't concern the band at all. They were more than happy with the record, and they had in their possession a batch of songs that, for the first time ever, they were truly proud of. Armed with that knowledge, they did the only sensible thing that they could think of. They went on tour. The Pantera live show was a brutal and uncompromising affair. Everywhere they went, fans left with bruised bodies and bloodied noses, but they kept on coming back for more. Pantera were a hit on the underground. The sales for Cowboys from Hell picked up enough for the record company execs to sit up and take notice. They were impressed and told the band to start writing material for a new album. The guys duly obliged, and as the tour ended they enjoyed only the briefest of rests before releasing the Cowboys from Hell home video and heading back into the studio.
So we hauled the gear down to the studio, plugged it up, did it Pantera style, and here it is.
The lack of any rest period seemed not to cause any problems for the band during the process of writing and recording the new album. They were still totally pumped up and raring to go, anxious to get their new songs down on tape. After the success of Cowboys from Hell, the band felt it was logical to recall Terry Date to produce them again. He was now a trusted friend of the band, and the guys liked and appreciated the way he worked. When Terry got the phone call from the band, he cleared his schedule and flew straight into Texas, excited at the prospect of working with Pantera again. Once in the studio, Date asked the band to play him what they'd come up with so far. The results amazed him. The last album had been heavy, but the new material the band had written had taken that heaviness to the nth degree. Philip was no longer attempting to sing. He was now growling savagely. This new vocal style was perfectly suited to the music that the band were making. It out-heavied just about every heavy metal band on the face of the planet. Yet at the same time, it was unbelievably complicated. None of the songs were straight-ahead, all-out metal assaults. They were just very proficient arrangements, with Darryl, who had now renamed himself Dimebag. Rex and Vinnie were all showing a technical proficiency with their instruments that even classical musicians couldn't hope to achieve. Terry Date secretly believed that the band's new sound was a product of their life out on the road on the last tour. Every show had been a little heavier and a little louder than the last one, and their punishing touring calendar had worked to the band's advantage. Unbeknownst to Terry Date, during the recording of the last album, Vinnie had been observing him. Vinnie was fascinated by the art of producing and wanted to learn the ropes. Eventually, he plucked up the courage to tell Terry as much. Terry liked the idea, admiring Vinnie's desire to broaden his horizons and to learn a new craft. So he agreed to take him on in an assistant producer capacity. In addition to this, as Terry was engineering and mixing the album too, Vinnie was also enlisted to help with these jobs, much to the drummer's delight. Vinnie really appreciated the producer giving him a shot, especially when Terry could easily have turned him down. As it happens, it was the beginning of a long and productive partnership. The recording of the album was a relatively painless process. Pantera were continuously creating music, and Terry Date relished his producing role, curbing the band's more outrageous tendencies. All the while, Vinnie Paul was watching and learning, and eventually the record was complete. The band titled it Vulgar Display of Power. It was chock full of fantastic songs, and there was absolutely no filler tracks on the album. It turned out to be a real smack in the face for the world metal scene, leaving fans, critics, and other bands in awe of the quality of the songs and the brutality of the Pantera sound. Almost immediately after the release of Vulgar Display, Pantera travelled to the Eastern Bloc to play the biggest live show of their careers. The Monsters of Rock show was held in Moscow, Russia. The band were shell-shocked upon their arrival in the country. They had trouble reconciling the opulent luxuries of places like the Winter Palace with the abject poverty of the average man, woman and child in the street. But the biggest shock was still to come on the day of the concert. The band rose early and travelled to the venue by coach. As they neared the location, they were surprised by the amount of fans milling around, as they were still used to playing club gigs at this point in their career. When the band entered the backstage area, their manager, Walter O'Brien, calmly informed them that they would be playing to over 1 million people. Their shock was absolute. They just could not fully grasp the concept of playing to such a massive audience. For the 4 young Southerners, it was a reality far beyond even their wildest dreams. Pantera took to the stage to the biggest cheer of the day. They absolutely shredded, and the kids loved every moment, as did the band. This was especially true of Phil Anselmo, who relished the opportunity to communicate with the metal-starved Russian fans. The only downer for the band was the sight of the Russian police beating the more rowdy fans with rubber batons. In America, they would have jumped in and done something about the situation. But here, a riot may have ensued and someone could have died. It was an unfortunate ending for an otherwise fantastic day for the band. Upon their return home, Pantera were greeted with an extremely pleasant surprise. It turned out that in their absence, they had entered the Billboard chart at number 42. The album eventually went platinum in the United States, Great Britain, Australia, Canada and Japan. Buoyed by the success of Vulgar Display, the band decided to take a well-earned break. All that is, except for Darryl. He was busy assembling and editing the hours of footage he had shot on his camcorder over the course of the tour. Eventually, the footage was released under the title of The Vulgar Video. His work done, Darryl now retired to join his bandmates on vacation. But thoughts of the new album were never far from his mind.
Far beyond driven. It takes off where Vulgar Display Power left off, because it's you take the sounds, you take the individuals, and you take the know-how, and you invent a better record as people who want to accomplish things in the musical, people who want to accomplish things in music that we want to accomplish, and that's fucking domination, that's conquering.
With their short break at an end, Pantera went back into the studio. As on the 2 previous albums, Terry Date was roped in as producer. And, as on Vulgar Display, Vinnie Paul co-produced and helped Terry out on the mixing and engineering side of things too. The only change in their working dynamic was a relocation from the studio they had previously used in Texas to one in Nashville, Tennessee. Over the course of their rest period, none of the band had been able to stop thinking about making a new record. On the previous album, they had truly defined their sound and single-handedly characterised a new genre that was titled power metal, the same as in the title of the first album they recorded with Philip. The irony being the fact that Pantera had virtually disowned all of the records they had made before Cowboys from Hell. While they still acknowledged these records, they maintained that they weren't the real Pantera. It was a viewpoint that the vast majority of fans shared. The new album was called Far Beyond Driven, and much to the surprise of everyone who wasn't closely involved with the band, it was a radical departure from Vulgar Display of Power. The new work was the heaviest output that Pantera had ever produced, so much so that some of the harder songs were pretty close to unlistenable. The change in direction left the critics dumbfounded, as Pantera had been expected to seize Metallica's crown as the kings of mainstream metal. This was never on the band's agenda. They didn't care about record sales, because their own integrity was infinitely more important to them than the lure of the almighty dollar. As a result, Far Beyond Driven was slated by the majority of the rock press. The band were less than impressed with the negative reaction that the album received from the media. They were insulted by the implications printed in certain publications about the quality of the record and the questions that were raised regarding the band's new direction. In addition to the comments about the album, there was also a great deal of speculation about the personal lives of the various members of the band. As the vocalist and focal point of Pantera, Phil Anselmo was forced to bear the brunt of the venomous and wholly groundless rubbish that was being churned out with alarming regularity by the rock rumour mill. The results of these actions was that Pantera stopped giving interviews. They didn't trust journalists and refused to talk to them for fear of being misquoted in the press. The only band member who had contact with the media with any degree of regularity was Vinnie Paul. This was due to the fact that he was so laid back that no matter what was thrown at him, he never got angry. The upshot of this being that only the facts got printed exactly as Vinnie had described them. Fortunately, the fans had a different perspective to that of the journalists who produced these inflammatory and scathing reviews. The Pantera devotees appreciated the band's attempt to make their music angrier and more brutal. They felt that Pantera were staying true to the metal blueprint that they had initially laid down on Cowboys from Hell. Because of these factors, Far Beyond Driven became the most loved Pantera album to date. The fan reaction was evident when the album rocketed to #1 in both the United States and Australia simultaneously. It was a feat that no other metal band had achieved, not even the mighty Iron Maiden. Pantera had well and truly entered the metal elite. Their success afforded them certain luxuries, specifically the power of veto over which bands they took out on the road with them, and over the course of the next 2 years, they exercised that power to its fullest extent. During this sequence of arena tours, they met and toured with bands like Slayer, Biohazard, Sepultura, Machine Head, Crowbar, and even groups as diverse as Motley Crue, Skid Row, Suicidal Tendencies, and Alice in Chains. It was a great time for the band, but the grueling schedule took its toll on them, and when the tour finally ended, they were totally wiped out with exhaustion. A holiday was in order.
Nobody wants to be here really, like they want to go back home to their down home southern little quiet hole in the wall Jacksonville. You know, I think I'm gonna end up staying out here, but everyone else is breaking. But it's good to be tight. There's like a little family thing going on, you know. It's like pretty much like us and Korn, Deftones, and RG, and you know, Max from Sepultura and Ross, and it's like just a certain clique, you know, and we all just want to work together and do things together, and I like it out here, but it's like just so crazy all the time.
Vinnie Paul, Daryl and Rex returned to Texas at the end of the tour, determined to enjoy a well-earned vacation period. Phil Anselmo, on the other hand, had a completely different agenda. He had a little something going on in his native New Orleans. The New Orleans metal scene was a fairly incestuous affair. Members from one band would often play in another band, or may even be members of 3 or 4 separate bands at any one time. This kind of musical crossover was common, and it was something that Phil was familiar with. As much as he loved being part of the Pantera machine, he still wanted to explore other musical areas that he wasn't able to implement in the Pantera dynamic. Upon his return to New Orleans, Phil met up with some of his old friends. Like Phil, all of them had day jobs in other bands and felt a little stifled in the creativity department. They too wanted to experiment. The results of their experiments were to become a thing of legend in stoner rock circles. Pepper Keenan was the lead singer and guitarist for a heavy rock band called Corrosion of Conformity. Like Phil Anselmo, he too was a New Orleans native who had been forced to relocate due to band commitments. However, while Phil had moved to Dallas, Texas, Pepper had moved to Raleigh in North Carolina. Phil and Pepper had been friends for a long, long time, and when they discovered that they both had breaks from their respective bands at the same time, they decided to hang out. While Phil and Pepper were coming in from out of town, the other main protagonists of this story had never left. Kirk Winstein and Todd Strange were founder members of the New Orleans sludgecore movement. Their band Crowbar was revered as being among the originators of the scene, the sound consisting of the kind of sonic murkiness exploited by the likes of Black Sabbath and St. Vitus Dance. Guitarist-vocalist Kirk and hulking bass player Todd were also longtime friends of Phil Anselmo and Pepper Keenan. so much so that Phil had actually produced their second self-titled album. They had all played in various local bands in their youth, and it was only natural that they should get together with Phil and Pepper upon their homecoming. The last piece of the puzzle was a bearded wild man drummer by the name of Jimmy Bower. Jimmy played guitar in Crowbar's longtime fellow sludgecore originators I Hate God. In addition to his 6-string duties in that band, he had also originally filled the drum stool in Crowbar before Craig Newnanmacher had taken over. As with the other guys, he was also a good friend of Phil Anselmo and was more than happy to spend some time with him and the other gentlemen. It was a veritable New Orleans sludgecore reunion. During the first week or so of hanging out together, nothing much went on. The guys smoked a lot of grass and drank a lot of beer and bourbon, and the whole time Black Sabbath pumped from the stereo, infecting the 5 men with its primal metal tattoo. Inspired by the music, the guys relocated to Phil's basement, where they set up their amps and instruments, and before long everyone started playing. They were jamming all hours of the day and night, fueled by high-class weed and cheap liquor. The music they were producing was basic, stripped-down metal. It was infused with a blues ambience, the guitars were dense, and the whole thing sounded muddy. Phil's vocals were deep, rich and soulful, and he was sounding better than ever before. He had written a lot of the music and lyrics 2 or 3 years earlier, but it had taken until now for him to be able to put them to use. One day they invited a bunch of friends round to listen to them play. The whole audience freaked out. They loved what they heard and told the guys as much. It was a shock to Phil, and he was genuinely surprised at how positive the reaction was. Phil, Pepper, Kirk, Todd and Jimmy decided that they should record and release their songs, but they needed a name. That name was to be Down. Once Down had collected together what they felt constituted enough quality tunes to make a complete album, they headed into the studio. In keeping with the spirit of the whole project, the band shunned the offer of a big recording venue and opted instead for a little intimate place in one of New Orleans' less salubrious districts. The band chose the studio not only for its atmosphere, but also its closeness to various drinking establishments. They decided to use old recording equipment in order to capture a retro kind of vibe. While everyone else was recording their records digitally, Down had decided to use outdated analog 4-track recorders, some of which dated back to the 1950s. Happy with their equipment and surroundings, the band began to record. Everyone involved with the process had the time of their lives, with very little happening without the imbibing of frightening amounts of alcoholic beverages. It took next to no time at all to record the album, and the guys were more than happy with the results. They named the record NOLA, which of course stands for New Orleans, Louisiana. The album was released in September of 1995 to a rapturous reception. The stoner kids loved it, the metal kids loved it, and the sludgecore and doom kids loved it as well. Not only was the fan reaction great, but the critics adored the earthiness of the record, along with its unashamed homage to Black Sabbath. Invigorated by the rave reviews, Down took to the road to play some live gigs. Everywhere they went, they were warmly received, but the tour didn't last long. The 5 band members had other commitments, and Pantera were calling Phil Anselmo's name.
People generally are concerned when someone has a drug problem, and he's been super strong. When he had his overdose, that was it. He said, "This is stupid. I don't need this. I'm killing myself. I'm killing my friends, my fans, everybody. And he's just been totally strong, totally rededicated, refocused to everything, and it's just been great, man."
While Philip Anselmo had been more than a little busy with his vacation project Down, so Vinny, Darryl and Rex had been doing a little something of their own. They had formed a ZZ Top tribute band, which they had named Tres Diablos. It wasn't a serious concern, merely a device to help pass the time. Their attention wasn't held by this project for very long, and they were soon anxious to begin work on a new Pantera record. With Phil back from New Orleans, having exorcised the demons he felt had been sitting on his shoulders, the band were now ready to begin penning songs as a unit again. Pantera returned to New Orleans to record again in early 1996. As before, Terry Date was brought in to helm the production duties, with Vinnie Paul acting as his second in command. The band were extremely happy with their new songs. They felt that they had managed to marry the heaviness of Far Beyond Driven to the groove of Cowboys from Hell. Unfortunately, the New Orleans studio didn't live up to the band's expectations, and after a great deal of discussion, Pantera made a joint decision to relocate the recording of the album to Daryl's home studio in Dallas. It didn't take long for the band to get things back on track. Daryl's studio was kitted out with some superb equipment, ensuring that Terry and Vinnie were in hog's heaven. Throughout the recording, there was a relaxed atmosphere that proved to be most productive as the band put together what was to be arguably their most complete album to date. Philip's lyrics were cathartically personal, and Daryl's riffing was dangerously corrosive. This was backed up by very solid support from Rex and Vinnie Paul. Eventually, the record was complete, and on May the 7th, 1996, the Great Southern Trendkill was released, to much adulation. The album was well received by the Pantera fanbase and critics alike. The band wasted little time in taking to the road on an extensive tour of the United States, along with pro-metal industrialists White Zombie. The tour was extremely successful and regularly pulled in record audiences, all eager to witness the famously uncompromising Pantera live show. The band ran themselves into the ground over the course of the tour, never satisfied unless they were giving 100%. After months on the road, the band rolled into Texas on the 12th of July 1996 for their hometown show at the Coca-Cola Starplex Theatre in Dallas. No one could have known how the night would end. After White Zombie had plied their trade to an appreciative crowd, Pantera took to the stage. The show was much the same as many they had played before. Phil was communicating with the crowd and a good time was being had by all. When the lights finally dimmed and the last goodbyes had been said, the band retired to the backstage area with their family and friends who had all turned out for the show. Spirits were high, and everyone in the band and all of the tour crew were letting their hair down and enjoying a good time. As the night wore on, people started to become somewhat the worse for wear due to alcoholic consumption. It was at this point that Philip Anselmo did what he freely admits was the most stupid thing of his life. He injected heroin. For Phil, there was no high. He overdosed almost immediately and stopped breathing. He was medically dead. Luckily for Philip, one of his friends was familiar with resuscitation and was able to revive him. Medics quickly arrived at the scene and Phil was rushed to a local hospital, leaving his bandmates shocked and bewildered. Why on earth had he done such a thing? Neither Rex, Daryl nor Vinnie had any clue. Philip was not a heroin user. It wasn't the sort of thing he'd usually do. Late that night, Phil checked himself out of the hospital and went home to ready himself for his return to the tour. He stayed up all night thinking, and eventually he called his bandmates to let them know that he was all right. They were deeply relieved and told Phil to take his time with his recovery, but he turned down their offers of time off and insisted on finishing the tour. He had no intention of letting down his bandmates or his fans again. In a cathartic mood swing, Phil released an emotional statement to the world's rock press. In it, he ridiculed his own drug use and admitted to frightening naivety. It was a big wake-up call to the rock world. If the mighty Philip Anselmo was not immune to the lure of heroin, what hope was there for the kids for whom he was a much-admired role model? It later emerged that Phil's drug abuse was far more reaching than anyone had previously imagined. Phil had badly injured his lower back on a previous tour, and in addition to a course of physiotherapy, his doctor had also prescribed a brand of painkillers. Before long, Phil was hooked without even realising it, and only his overdose forced him to admit the truth to himself. Phil decided to suck it up and sort himself out, and with the moral support of his bandmates, he went cold turkey and kicked his habit. Unfortunately, even to this day, Phil's back still regularly gives him terrible pain. After surviving such a potentially traumatic period, it came as little surprise to anyone when Pantera announced that they were taking a break from making music.
We just felt like, from all the times that we've done in stores, meeting with the fans, and they're always telling us that, the ultimate Pantera record would be a live record. And after 4 studio albums and constantly touring, we just felt like the time would be right.
Now that the band members had some free time, they were able to pursue other projects, although Rex kicked back and did nothing much at all. He hung out with Vinnie and Daryl, and even occasionally drove down to New Orleans to stay with Philip. But for the most part, he just took things easy. The same could not be said for his Pantera brethren. Everyone else had projects stacked up to the ceiling. Firstly, there was Daryl. He was assembling the footage for a third Pantera home video. It was a task that Daryl thrived on, and he thoroughly enjoyed doing it. He really pushed the envelope by including some rather risque material, though when the video was submitted for certification, only the smallest of cuts were required. Watch It Go was released on the 11th of November 1997 and sold a fair few copies, debuting at number 1 on the Billboard video chart. Watching the video is a great way to get to know the band and to see how they all interact with each other. Pantera know this, and by giving the fans a glimpse into their world, they managed to show that they are just 4 regular guys who got lucky. It's little wonder that Pantera are regarded as the metal band of the people. Whilst Daryl was overseeing the third home video, Phil was down in New Orleans taking on a mountain of different projects. He had at least 4 or 5 side bands on the go at any one time, including Superjoint Ritual, Tapeworm, and Viking Crown. Tapeworm was particularly interesting, as it also included Trent Reznor and Robin Fink of 9 Inch Nails, though none of their material has been released to date. But the thing that Phil was most involved in was something known as the House of Shock. Down in New Orleans, Halloween is treated particularly seriously, and to some of the city's residents, it's a more important event than Christmas. This is due to New Orleans' history and relationship with voodoo and the black arts. As a result, much of the city begins its Halloween celebrations at the beginning of October, with these celebrations climaxing on the day of Halloween itself. Being a native of New Orleans, Philip Anselmo had always been a big Halloween fan. One year, Phil and some friends decided that they were going to put on a truly frightening event. Thus, the House of Shock was born. The venue itself is not actually a house, rather a gigantic warehouse. This warehouse is split up into various sections which are all filled with blood-curdling horrors. Before long, the House of Shock was the place to be at Halloween, and every year it has grown and grown in its capacity to scare the wits out of unsuspecting punters, and no doubt it will continue to do so in the future. While Phil was frightening people in New Orleans, Vinnie Paul, like Daryl, was working on something to benefit the band. Throughout Pantera's previous tour, Vinnie had been recording shows. He had realised that so many of the albums he had loved as a boy had been live recordings, and he felt that Pantera were at the right point in their career to release one of their own. Luckily, the rest of the band agreed, so Vinnie went about putting the record together. He was very judicious in his pruning of the material that went onto the tape. Every song that he selected had the trademark precision brutality, but Vinnie was also very keen to capture some of the rawness and energy that the band exerted in a live situation. Bit by bit, the album started to take shape, with Vinnie going to great pains to ensure that the record ran smoothly, so it felt as if it were a real gig, recorded on one night. There was nothing worse, he surmised, than constant breaks between the songs. He wanted to hear the fans cheering throughout the album's duration. Vinnie achieved his goal for the most part, but he felt that something was missing. As good as he knew the album to be, he was worried that he was somehow cheating the Pantera fans, seeing as he knew how the majority of them would already own all of the songs on the record. The band sat down to a meeting, and all agreed with Vinnie's point of view. To rectify this, they decided to write and record a couple of new and original songs in the studio, and tag them onto the end of the album, as a little bonus for all the fans buying the record. When official Live 101 proof was released on the 29th of July 1997, it was compared to other classic live metal albums, such as Iron Maiden's Live After Death and Motorhead's No Sleep Till Hammersmith. The fans loved it too, which was the only fact that really mattered to the guys in Pantera.
Ozfest is the funnest tour in the world. You play a day, you get a day off. You play a day, you get a day off. You get to meet, all your favorite bands that you ever played with, and then all the new and up-and-coming bands, and it's just a great thing.
In early 1998, Pantera took to the road on the infamous tour that was the Ozfest. They were joined by such metal luminaries as Slayer, Soulfly, Vision of Disorder, and of course the newly reformed Black Sabbath. The tour rolled across America, leaving stadiums full of battered but happy fans in its wake. Although Black Sabbath were the main draw for the American audience, Pantera were still a very close second. The Ozfest made a total mockery of the 1996 comments made by Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins, who had stated, "Rock is dead." It was almost as if all of the bands on the bill were determined to make him eat his words. As the American leg of the Ozfest came to an end, it was announced that there would be a one-off show in England. Pantera were going to play their first UK show in 4 years. Saturday, June the 20th was the date of the inaugural UK Ozfest. 60,000 fans turned up to witness what some were describing as the metal event of the decade. As the fans piled into the Milton Keynes Bowl, it was announced that Korn had dropped out at the last minute, with Therapy valiantly stepping in to replace them. No one was that upset. The majority of fans were there for either Slayer, Pantera, or Black Sabbath. England's own Pitch Shifter were the first band on the second stage. Although the rain was incessantly beating down, they managed to stir up one of the most frenetic mosh pits of the day. Fear Factory were up next on the main stage. As always, the reception they got was fantastic, and they played a great set. As other bands such as Headpie, Slayer and Soulfly came on, the anticipation was fairly crackling in the air. Eventually the time had come, and the Cowboys from Hell took to the stage to the biggest cheer of the day bar none. Pantera disappointed no one. They whipped the crowd into a lunatic frenzy, playing classic after classic. It was a truly amazing sight, with at least half of the crowd either moshing away or singing along with Phil. Perhaps the biggest cheer came when they played the opening verse of Iron Maiden's song, Number of the Beast. It was truly the set of the day, and when the time came for Pantera to vacate the stage, they left to the sound of rapturous and appreciative applause. It was like they had never been away. After such a memorable performance, it was unlikely that anyone was going to live up to the standards set by Pantera that day. Although plaudits did go out to Entombed and the always excellent Foo Fighters for their fresh and vibrant sets. Eventually it came down to the final band of the day, the almighty Black Sabbath. Their show was fantastic, featuring all their classic tracks such as Iron Man, War Pigs, Paranoid and Fairies Wear Boots. Fans close to the stage were treated to a view of the 4 members of Pantera, as well as members of the other bands, watching their heroes perform from the side of the stage. But as good as Sabbath were, it was Pantera's day, and after the performance they had put in, everyone agreed that they deserved it.
We're not gonna fucking blow nothing up. We're not gonna fucking have lasers. We're not gonna have fucking dragons jumping out of the PA.
After their triumphant Ozfest appearance, Pantera moved on to mainland Europe to play some more big shows, most notably Holland's Dynamo Festival, which attracts in excess of 100,000 fans on a yearly basis. As the shows came to an end, a weary but happy Pantera made their way back home to the United States. It didn't take long for the band to get the itch to start working again, and in late 1998 they re-entered the studio. For the first time, Vinnie Paul took on the production duties by himself, without the input of Terry Date. But the resulting recordings were none the worse for the fact. Pantera were quickly locked into the zone. The only concern anyone had was for the album that they were making. And lo and behold, slowly but surely, the record started to come together. The outcome was trademark Pantera. Bombastic guitars, killer hooks, thunderous drums, and most of all, Phil's vocals far surpassing all of his previous efforts. His vocals had developed a hitherto unexhibited richness, and his lyrics were more personal and more political than ever before. Obviously, his heroin overdose and treatment at the hands of the rock press had given him plenty of source material at which he could vent his spleen. Before long, the record was done and dusted. Reinventing the Steel was released on the 21st of March 2000. The album was generally well received, though there were differing viewpoints within the rock media. While some felt it was a return to form, others surmised that it was merely a continuation from the previous record and that the band were lazily cruising along on autopilot. This is an opinion not shared by the Pantera fans. In sticking resolutely to their guns, Pantera have stayed true to themselves. You won't find any nu metal Limp Bizkit style rapping or techno beats on a Pantera record. You'll find heavy metal played by metal fans for metal fans, and that won't change anytime soon. Pantera have always been quite happy to let the music do the talking. They never actively seek to publicise or promote themselves, as they know that the fans will buy their albums and come to their concerts regardless of whether they've been interviewed in Kerrang! Or Metal Hammer magazine. This band couldn't care less about fashion. How could they, with an album called The Great Southern Trend Kill? Pantera have a lot of exciting plans for the future. In addition to heading out on tour, the band also have another little treat lined up for the fans. The 3 Pantera home videos are being collected up and released together on DVD. As well as the videos themselves, the DVD contains many special features that are guaranteed to please any Pantera fan. It's just another gesture from a band who will go out of their way to see that their fans get the respect and fair treatment they deserve. It's something they've done so many times before and will more than likely do countless times in the future. How many bands could say that?
Thank you for buying Maximum Pantera. We hope you enjoyed it. Watch out for further titles on Chrome Dreams coming up soon. If you did enjoy it or have any comments or suggestions, write to us at Chrome Dreams, PO Box 230, New Malden, Surrey, UK, KT36YY, or email on mail@chromedreams.co.uk. For more details on joining the Maximum Collectors Club and claiming your free CDs, check out our website at www.chromedreams.co.uk or look at the booklet inside this CD. Thanks again for listening and goodbye for now.